Welcome, everyone. I'm Jim Vetter, and I am the Vice Chair of the Somerville Democratic City Committee. We would like to welcome you to our Candidates Forum for the 27th Middlesex State Representative Primary. This forum is hosted by the Somerville Democratic City Committee. We have with us the two candidates who were running for this position, Jason Mackey and Representative Erica Uderhoven. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. As you may well know, this primary election is on September 6th. And again, for this election, all of us who are voters will have the ability to vote by mail. Thank you to so many city committee members who submitted questions in advance. The Forum Planning Committee reviewed all those questions carefully, and they helped inform the questions we'll ask tonight. And if there's a topic that you are really eager to hear about from these candidates and it doesn't come up during the forum tonight, I know that these candidates are very accessible. And so I urge you to reach out to them directly. The structure of the forum, we're going to begin in just a moment with opening statements of 2 minutes each that will then be followed by a series of questions. For each question, each candidate will have 2 minutes. Our timer will be showing timing cues as we go along, counting down from 2 minutes. And when the time is up, if the candidate hasn't finished, we will mute the candidate at 2 minutes. Before the forum started, our Forum Planning Committee tossed a coin to determine the order of speaking. So we'll start with Jason Mackey and then go on to Representative Erica Uderhoven. And then from there on, we'll just alternate questions. So to begin with, a 2-minute opening statement from Jason.
Thank you, Jim. Hi, everyone. Great to have you here, and thank you all for attending. My name is Jason Mackey. I was born in Compton, California, and came to Hanover, Massachusetts when I was about 3 months old. I'm the proud son of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put food on the table and keep a roof over our heads. Not knowing my dad, I was forced to grow up real quick. I got a job as soon as I turned 16 and worked to put myself through both Boston College High School and later Northeastern University, where I studied economics and history. Professionally, I'm an entrepreneur. I started my first company as a sophomore at Northeastern. It was a clean tech company that ultimately didn't do as well as I had hoped. However, it was there that I fell in love with entrepreneurship. Since founding that first company, I went on to found nearly a dozen other companies to varying degrees of success across many different industries. I am passionate about innovation and finding creative solutions to complex problems. Most recently, I've begun raising a small venture fund to invest in the entrepreneurial futures of women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, people that look like me as they embark on their own entrepreneurial journeys. I'm running to represent this district at the State House because I believe my lived experience in overcoming the challenges of growing up under less than ideal circumstances and being a gay Black entrepreneur in a largely white heterosexual world have prepared me to work with people at every level of government, even those I disagree with, to get things done. I am a pragmatic progressive who believes we can accomplish so much more by working together than by going it alone. Compromise, though it's often seen as a 4-letter word today, is necessary if we expect to get anything done. That is why I humbly ask for your vote in September's primary and again in the general election on November 8th. Thank you again for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jason. And opening statement next, Erica.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Erica, your current state representative serving my first term. When I first ran to be your state rep 2 years ago, I promised to make the State House work for you. This meant fighting for transparency and accountability so that together we could transform the State House to pass progressive policies. And I am proud to share with you all that I've delivered on this commitment. At the beginning of my term, we successfully increased transparency in the House for the first time in over 17 years. These changes ensure that a majority of committee votes are available online, increasing your voice and your agency in the legislature. I'm indebted to thousands of voters like you who organized across the state to demand a legislature that passed progressive issues. Both through these rules reform and ongoing momentum from this robust statewide organizing infrastructure, together we created a deep shift in the legislature and made material differences through passing progressive legislation that prior to this session remained stagnant for years. This includes policies on climate change, an issue that saw no progress in over 12 years. But then this session, we passed not just one, but two laws to transform Massachusetts into a green economy. Public education by securing much more funding for public schools than in previous years. Reproductive justice by codifying our right to choose and protecting patients and providers from draconian laws. And immigrant justice through passing the Work and Family Mobility Act. Core to my work and all of our work in democracy is that we must work together, because nothing is accomplished in the State House alone. I am proud to work as a team with my Somerville's legislative delegation, city elected officials, community organization, and many of you. While I'm thrilled about our wins this session, we have much more work ahead of us. We must raise progressive revenue so that the very wealthy and corporations pay their fair share to fund the T, invest in our schools, healthcare, roads, sewers, and affordable housing, and retrofit all of our homes and buildings to have net zero carbon emissions. I've been at the forefront of fighting for progressive issues in our State House and our city for many years. I'm dedicated to channeling that spirit and dedication of our community to fight tirelessly so that all of us can live with dignity and respect. And to that end, I humbly ask for your vote and look forward to answering all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So speaking of questions, our first question will go first to Erica as we're alternating. How would you say that your experiences in Somerville would inform your work as a representative for the benefit of Somerville and other communities?
Oh, I would say that greatly. I mean, this work can't be done alone, as I mentioned. We work in partnership as a delegation and also with our community organizations to push for a lot of these changes. And so that has, whether it be putting forth legislation that hasn't existed in any other part of the state, like TOPA and the transfer fee, and then pushing that forward through our activism here in the city, and then spreading that to other districts. Another example is Pilot, which is ensuring that Tufts and partners pay their fair share to city budgets. That's something that we're having discussions with in Braintree and other parts of the state, Northampton. These are great ideas that we're able to spread across the state, but then also work in partnership across the state to push for these issues together. So I have always, through my advocacy work, through my current time in the state rep, worked in partnership with our community organizations and city elected officials to push for these material changes, and to also reach out to other city elected officials or other community organizations across the state so that we can build up a statewide organizing infrastructure to push for these issues. I don't know how much time I've left, so I hope, do I have more?
You have
yes.
35 seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I have a lot more. Okay, yeah, I can talk more.
You're doing great.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, no, and I'll share that. The other thing too is that there's a real need in the legislature to fight for things at the statewide level. So when Somerville shows that this can be done at a community level, it makes and provides a blueprint for other communities to follow in that same model or to try different kind of advocacy that they haven't done before. So when I talk about Pilot, that's something that a lot of elected officials were surprised to find out about until we shared it with them, that Somerville pushed for a pilot agreement. So anyway, I think I'm done with my time. So thank you.
Thank you. And Jason, same question.
So I came to Somerville about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, in the before times, September 2019. I came here because I was, ultimately I was evicted from my place in Cambridge, in Kendall Square. And my partner and I were looking for a place to, resettle and find, a real home with a real community. And that's exactly what we found here in Somerville. Nothing against Cambridge, but we just didn't have a strong local community, if you will, our neighborhood community, like we have here. And so I got involved with this committee that summer, became the ward committee, the diversity officer. And really that's when I began to meet everyone and to get out there and to know my neighbors and to become more involved in our local community here. And it's been phenomenal. It's been welcoming. It's been amazing. I've had so many experiences that I would have never had in Cambridge or anywhere else that I've lived, frankly. And that's, ultimately one of the reasons why I want to run, is because I feel a strong connection to this city. And I think we can do so much more. And I'm hoping that I can be part of that. One way or the other, I will be. But I'm hoping to be part of that at the State House to implement a lot of change that can ultimately help the least amongst us. I've gone through a lot. I've experienced, a lot of trauma in my life. I've overcome these challenges, and I hope to help others overcome their challenges and make life that much easier for the least amongst us. So I hope to be a strong advocate for the least amongst us, and I hope to be a strong advocate for all of us at the State House. And a lot of that comes down to, what I learned here in Somerville over these past couple years. And so that's Somerville has been quite instrumental to my development and to the center of myself.
We're at time. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
So alternating questions. Jason, you'll get the next question first.
Yep.
In Massachusetts, we have a number of policies in place to facilitate elections and participation in democracy, while we're seeing a trend across the country to put up more barriers to voting. What policies would you support to continue protecting and expanding fair voter access?
Yeah, our democracy has been under attack for quite some time now, nationwide. And Massachusetts has historically led the way in solidifying democracy and maintaining that democracy and the vote for its citizens. And I think we should continue doing that. Same-day registration would be great. I love what we've done recently with vote by mail, making that permanent. Increasing accessibility, making it as easy as possible to vote is critical. We can't stress that enough. And I think we're doing everything right so far. And I'd like to continue to solidify some of the most recent changes and ensure that we all can vote. This is our responsibility as citizens to vote. It's embarrassing that we have such low participation. I'd love to get out the word to help more people get out the vote and come to the polls and make their voices heard. We're fortunate to be fairly progressive here, but that can change. As we've seen with Patriot Front, those folks are more and more prominent. And who knows if they'll run for office someday. So we need to make sure that we protect our elections as best we can. And I'll do everything in my power to ensure more people come out to vote and that more people have access and the vote is as easy as possible.
Thank you, Jason. Erica, same question.
Yes, thank you. No, that's absolutely right. I think our voting rights have actually always been under attack. And sadly, Massachusetts has actually not been always leading the way. One great example of that is same-day voter registration, something that we fought very hard for on the House floor. It's something the Senate passed, and actually every other elected and public body supports same-day voter registration except for the House of Representatives, which is why I teamed up with a number of progressives to push for a fight on the House floor to get same-day voter registration. While we did not prevail, that fight still goes on, and we need to ensure we get that. The other piece I'll also put out, while I'm happy with mail-in voting, there's kind of two other pieces that I think are really important. One is particularly on making Election Day a holiday, as well as expanding the rights for young people to be able to vote. There's ways that we can do things like, you can register to vote with just a student ID. We can ensure that there's also a polling place at every university, and as well as ensuring that every community has a easily accessible voting place. That's something we don't have. And lastly, I'll also share too that we need to restore much more. We've done incredible progress on this session around incarcerated people's right to vote, but there are still a number of really big barriers that prevent incarcerated people from being able to vote, particularly around a need for a constitutional amendment to ensure that we can ensure that everyone can vote regardless of their history. So those are some of the big pieces that I'm going to be pushing for. I'll also add, related to that, is I think we really need to have publicly financed elections. We do have one candidate at a statewide race that is running on with publicly financed clean elections, but that's something that's all too difficult to come across, which is why due to the system, right, we don't have the diversity of candidates that we should see statewide. And that's something that I think also is a barrier to voting rights and people's ability to express their voice for who they want to see representing them. So that's something too that, in addition to clean elections, as well as more campaign finance reform to ensure that you're not given a step up just because you have good connections or able to get $1,000 checks, which we do have some really good regulation on that at the state level, but it can be much better.
Thank you, Erica. So Erica, Alternity, you get the next question first. The opening of the Green Line extension, while increasing transportation options, is bound to have a wide range of other impacts on our community, including gentrification. Both of your websites say that you support housing as a human right. What specifically would you do to help with the housing affordability crisis faced by so many residents of Somerville? And Erica, you get this one first.
Yeah, so we Okay, great, thank you. Housing is a human right, absolutely critical. The reality with the housing market is that we're treating it as an unregulated market where housing is treated as a commodity that is financialized, that is strictly for profit and not for ensuring that people have roofs over their heads. So the biggest core piece of this is around regulation of what kind of market we want to see in housing. And I believe that if we are truly committed to ensuring that everyone has housing, we need to have a housing first model, as well as fighting for more affordable housing that is publicly funded. There are incredible models out there in other countries around mixed income social housing. I'm incredibly excited to kind of tag on the first question around the Somerville Community Land Trust is a great example of a model where it can be an incredible avenue for people to be able to be first-time homeowners because we're able to change the kind of product that a house is on the market. It's not just something that is, you capture all of the value of over several decades and then make an incredible profit off of it while other people are pushed out of the system. And that is the dichotomy we're living in right now. Of course, I support all of the priorities that we've put forth in Somerville, both through home rule petitions and through our legislation for local option. This includes rent stabilization or rent control, having a transfer fee to fully fund affordable housing developments. That is huge. That is funding that can really make an incredible difference because so many projects are just on the brink of being able to get funded, as well as, of course, just to highlight my predecessor's bill, Tenants' Opportunity to Purchase, or TOPA. That's something that she filed several years ago. It can be game changing to ensure that we are when a landlord chooses to sell a property, that tenants have the ability to buy that property as an association, keeping the rents low under certain terms and agreements that are set by the city. So these are all really
great. Thank you. And Jason, same question.
Thank you. Yeah, we are in the middle of a very serious housing crisis, and I experienced that firsthand. My rent was, we fell behind on our rent, but we also faced a $1,000 rent increase, which made renewing our lease virtually impossible. And the stress of dealing with an eviction, it was honestly one of the most traumatic experiences that I had to deal with. And I can only imagine how horrible that must be for families that have to deal with evictions. I was fortunate to be able to come through on the other side intact, but so many people don't. And to address the housing crisis in Somerville, we can't just build our way out of it. I certainly don't think that's the solution, but we can be more creative with the way we build. Zoning laws should be changed to allow us to build higher, more mixed-use properties. And in addition to that, if we are going to build more, we need to be able to protect tenants so landlords don't necessarily cash in on this type of building. Tenants should be given the right of first refusal if they are in a situation where the landlord is selling their properties. And when tenants are trying to find a new place, it shouldn't cost this much. It shouldn't be so the upfront cost of finding a new home should not be prohibitive, and that needs to change. Evictions, we should frankly seal all eviction records. When I go out, if I ever need to find a new apartment, anyone could search my name and find an eviction, which makes it that much harder to find a place to live. That is something that is frankly unacceptable, and we need to change that. It's our zoning laws in general need to change. Things can be done differently. And my experience, I hope to be able to bring some change and impact this, have a positive impact on this crisis.
Thank you, Jason. So Erica has dropped off of the Zoom. Hopefully Erica will be back on in just a moment. But actually the way the alternation and Erica's working to get right back on right now. So the way this is alternating, that you have the next question, Jason. So
Sure.
We'll go ahead and do that.
All right.
But following the murder of George Floyd, there has been heightened attention in Somerville, across Massachusetts, and across the country to the idea of developing more equitable models to promote public safety and well-being and provide effective crisis response. What do you see as key components of a public safety approach for Somerville and other communities? And what role do you think a state representative can play in advancing such approaches across the state?
Yeah, this has become an incredibly important topic, and increasingly so most recently in the past few years. There are a couple approaches. I don't think that our Black and brown communities should live in fear of the police. That said, I do not believe that we should necessarily defund the police, but instead find more creative ways of working with law enforcement to build safer, better relations with our minority communities here. I do believe in eliminating qualified immunity, and I think doing that would prevent officers from taking advantage of the situation. And I think that would certainly hold a lot more accountable when there is, a terrible, event. And, as a community, we should work more to build a more inclusive city. I'm the diversity officer for Ward 5 here. Part of my job is to make sure that more voices are heard, more people come to the table, and that we're a more welcoming place. So I would, and as a gay person of color, it can be kind of worrying. It's scary to see an increase in violence, and the emergency services that are available. They need to be supported as best we can, and response times need to be improved. And our communities where violence is a more common occurrence need the support, more support as we can give them. And my job at the State House would be to work with my colleagues to increase funding and to make sure that we have the resources necessary to ensure the safety of everyone and the increase equality across the district.
Thank you, Jason. And Erica, welcome back after that little Zoom glitch. But do you see the question in the chat?
I do. Sorry, if I could have a minute to read it. And then, yes, thank you for everyone's patience. That has never happened to me before where my phone just turned off. Okay. Yes. Okay. Ready to go. So yes, I think this is a really critical question. I think one of the biggest things just to directly address this issue is the ACEs bill, which is to have alternative responses to, for public safety. I've also seen, we've done work with the Portuguese government as well as with other states, including New York, around having safe consumption sites and really centering on care rather than treating what are often public health issues or economic issues as a criminal issue when they are not. And those are some models that I'm really enthusiastic about. Again, that's something to come back to the first question, Somerville is trying to push forward. And I think that if we're able to be the first mover on that in Massachusetts, we can then push that to other parts of the state. So that's just one piece that is really core to that. I also cannot talk about, public safety and racial injustice without talking about the criminal justice system, where in Massachusetts at the state level, that is where most of our public safety, spending is with the Department of Corrections and the court systems and probation and all of that, right? And there's, of course, there is state police, but it's a much smaller budget compared to the municipal police. And although I do think, those things all do need changes, the criminal justice system or criminal injustice system is a part of the state government that has absolutely no accountability. It's something is why I've started organizing monthly, sometimes once or twice a month, visits to DOC facilities to hold them accountable, right? To understand what is going on and what are the human injustices happening behind those bars. Because regardless of why you're there, and let's face it, a lot of why people are there are not for just criminal issues. It is because of systemic racism. It is because of economic injustice, and it is because we treat public health issues as criminal. Those are things that I've been working tirelessly on that we need to be changing to hold the DOC accountable, to put people on the path to recovery and not for more harm and trauma.
Thank you, Erica. And Erica, next question goes to you first. 13 states in the country had trigger warning bans waiting in the wings as the fate of Roe versus Wade was decided. Even in Massachusetts, we can't afford to be complacent. While conservative activists continue to seek ways to limit access to abortion care. In the wake of the repeal of Roe, how will you protect and advance abortion as healthcare and ensure reproductive equity?
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, it is really core to just so much of our human rights being under attack and our democracy being under attack in our country, and creating these gender and racial injustices, right, systemically. The first thing I will say that I'm incredibly proud of is the House of Representatives, 4 days after Roe was struck down, passed an incredibly important, effective bill that did a number of things, but just to summarize, it protected patients and providers from all of these draconian laws, such as SB 8 coming out of Texas, so that you do not get prosecuted for seeking basic health care, nor does someone who is coming from out of state into Massachusetts to get basic health care, that under Massachusetts, you are under Massachusetts law and you cannot be prosecuted if you did not break Massachusetts law. And we have codified the right to choose in Massachusetts through the Roe Act 18 months ago. So that's another piece that provides that protection for patients and providers. The piece that was in the House version of the bill and is very likely not going to make it because of opposition with the governor and with the, unfortunately, sadly, the Senate leadership, is around access to third trimester abortions. That is something I'm going to continue to fight for, as well as increasing access to, contraceptives, gender affirming care, as well as, access to, telehealth and other forms of, abortion access for gender affirming care. So those are some of the things that are really big that haven't been fully fleshed out and could be improved in Massachusetts, particularly on the piece around third trimester abortion and healthcare access. I have a personal friend who had to spend $20,000 to go to Colorado, fly there for healthcare because she found out too late that her fetus was having continual severe seizures. This was clear that the quality of life of the fetus was not going to be one, and that he would not survive more than a few days out of the womb, and she could not get that access to care in Massachusetts, and that's not right, as well as many other stories of pregnant people. So we'll continue to fight that.
Thank you. And Jason, questions over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, the recent developments from the Supreme Court are disgusting, and I can't agree with Erica more that this is something where Massachusetts must continue to lead the way. It's great that we've codified access to abortion here. The Roe Act has gone a long way to do so. I think in addition to that, perhaps a constitutional amendment might also provide us with better legal footing if we need to challenge this at a federal level, which I'm sure we will. But providing access to abortion, safe access to abortions is critical. And I can't, it's embarrassing, the way our activist court has behaved. It's shameful. Obviously we can't change that at the State House here, but I think we need to look at a lot of, reform at the Supreme Court. But yeah, we need to continue leading the way in Massachusetts, protect out-of-state citizens that come here for abortion. We will not prosecute them. I think that's you know, we cannot allow Texas to dictate what we do here in Massachusetts. We will protect our citizens and anyone that wants to visit here for their own reasons, from any draconian laws nationwide. So I'm encouraged by what's happening at the State House currently. I do also support, a third trimester access if necessary. I wish the State House could be a little bit more collaborative and work together to come up with a solution here, but hopefully that will in the future. But yeah, I support access to abortion, freedom of reproductive rights in all its forms.
Thank you. Jason, next question goes to you first. What do you see as the state representative's role in advancing racial equity? And what have you learned from the successes and failures of Somerville addressing racial equity that you'll use in your work?
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. I as a gay person of color, oftentimes don't know how to answer it. It's I've grown up in a very white environment, to speak plainly, and Somerville is a very it's becoming a little bit more diverse, but it's fairly white. And so how do we address that? How do we make this a much more welcoming and inclusive place? Can be difficult, but for me, speaking as a person of color, I would be, and if I'm elected, I would want to be as visible as I can be. I would want to make sure that people see what's possible. I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I do not have a trust fund. It was very difficult getting to where I am right now, and there's still a long way to go. And I think being accessible to the least amongst us, some of the communities that really struggle with economic security, will be critical. And I would love to be able to work with people to help show them that anything is possible and that this country truly is a land of opportunity, but recognizing that it's incredibly difficult. And there is so much systemic racism built into our society. And we will address that as best we can. And we're making headway here and there, but there's still so much more to do. But my job, I believe, is to champion the least amongst us and to be as visible as possible and to work with community leaders to help them gain access to resources that they need, and make sure that they're part of the conversation, make sure that they have a seat at the table. And that is, especially as a person of color, that is going to be my job, is to help as many people in challenging situations as I can, and make sure that we build an environment where everyone.
Thank you. And over to Erica.
Yeah, I think every single policy decision is a policy that is about racial equity. I'll just take one example: progressive revenue, right? We see massive wealth inequality, bigger than ever in our country's history. And in Boston and Massachusetts, we have a vast wealth inequality. I don't need to cite again the Boston Globe reporting about that, but $8 versus $250,000. That's outrageous. And it is the same with healthcare access, transportation access, educational access. Take any issue that we confront in the State House, and we ought to be taking an approach that is centered on racial equity. When we hand out corporate tax breaks or tax breaks for the very wealthy, which we sadly did, is one of the things I fought very hard for, but we did not pass, although we were able to block a number of other tax breaks on the estate tax cut. That is not going to people of color. That is strictly largely going to wealthy, top 7% to top 3% households. And that's something that is an example of where we're failing with racial equity. I think the thing that we can learn from Somerville, and actually with this past 2+ years post George Floyd, that it's not enough to just talk about diversification. It is not enough to just talk about hearing people's voices. We need to take action. We know what's been wrong. It's not as if the same-day voter registration, which is a Jim Crow era voting law that was put in place during the Jim Crow era, is something we just discovered yesterday. It's something that we ought to change because we know of its racist history and legacy. So I think that those are the things that are what we are responsible for in the State House, is actually to implement those policy changes. Of course, we want to diversify, right? And that's something, for example, we passed a educator diversity bill, but what we didn't pass was ensuring that we're teaching an anti-racist curriculum. And that's a bill that I filed to ensure that we're actually teaching in our schools that is affirming to BIPOC students, that is affirming to BIPOC educators. And that's something we haven't passed. So just gives an example of the work ahead of us and what we need to do.
Thank you. So Erica, next question goes to you first. The Somerville Dems endorsed the Fair Share Amendment, and we are campaigning to pass this important amendment. Folks can join us in that campaigning. If and when Fair Share passes, there will be significantly more funding for education. As a representative, what would you see as the priorities for spending those additional funds?
Yeah, so absolutely critical that we pass the Fair Share Amendment. It's something that I hope that once we pass it, and if we win, and we have to win, so I urge everyone to please volunteer, put in time, or to donate to the campaign, that we can continue to make our tax code not regressive. Right now, it's a regressive tax code, which means the rich get richer and the poor get poorer systemically through our taxation system. We have a taxation system in the state government that makes wealth inequality and income inequality worse. That needs to change. And I believe that the Fair Share Amendment can help propel us to pushing that change in the legislature, which I'm very committed to fighting for, which is why I chose to be on the Committee on Revenue as my top choice committee. In terms of the priorities on how that needs to be spent, I think that, the Fair Share campaign has really outlined that very well, but I think some of the big thing is particularly around investing in our K-12 education, pre-K education, as well as taking steps towards debt-free higher ed. And that's why I emphasize the need to continue to fight for more progressive revenue, because even if we get the Fair Share Amendment passed, that will not change the fact that we have one of the highest debt from public higher ed in the countries. Here in Massachusetts, we have the most inaccessible public higher ed institutions. That's just one example. I don't need to tell anyone about all the things that we need to do to fix the T. We have set the T up over the past several decades on a course of failure. And one of those levers of failure, in addition to, of course, management, is around spending and funding, and that we have a $10 billion backlog. We need to be ensuring that we're putting that funding to repairs and investing in the workforce. That all needs to happen at the T. And again, while I'm excited about the few $1 billion that the Fair Share Amendment is going to raise, we need to continue raising more money to invest in the T. There is that $10 billion backlog. It's not going anywhere, and it's only going to get worse. Not to mention, I believe we should be expanding the T, right? We should have more bus services. Right now, Somerville is facing a cut in bus services, which is outrageous. It's outrageous across the state. We need to ensure that we're actually having a thriving MBTA, as well as investing in all aspects of our infrastructure.
Thank you. Jason, over to you. And Jason, you're muted.
Sorry, too many different screens. I support the Fair Share Amendment. I think that there's a lot we can do to improve the tax policies across the state. The money that we gain from the Fair Share Amendment, 4% on $1 million incomes or more, should be spent on education and transportation. We have McGrath Highway here in Somerville, which is a bit outside the district, but still dangerous. And, we all drive over it. And that's something that we absolutely need to address. And speaking more broadly on our tax code here, our corporate tax rate is far too low compared to other states. We need to increase corporate taxes as well as income tax on the wealthy. These taxes can go toward so many different projects across the district. I would love to see more investment in housing, of course, to make it easier for developers to build affordable units. And if we allow that, then perhaps we can increase the minimum requirement of affordable units per new construction from 20% perhaps up to 25%. another issue, you could tax the endowments of some of these universities out there that have in excess of $1 billion. That could also generate more revenue for the district, for the city, and for the Commonwealth. I think that the Fair Share Act certainly goes, a long way to address part of this, but there's still a lot more we can do to ease the burden on low and middle class families. So I certainly, we need to prevent any more undue burden for our families, and perhaps look at how we can be more creative in collecting taxes across the state.
Thank you. And Jason, the next question goes to you first. It's a hot summer here in Somerville. We've seen record temperatures around the world and in the US in the past couple of weeks. Given the scope of influence that a state representative has, what do you intend to do to assist Somerville and its residents to continue to mitigate greenhouse gas output and adapt to a warming climate?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. That's a big question. I worked for the Department of Public Utilities, and I also worked for NSTAR, now Eversource. And the first company I founded was a clean tech energy company, and that helped businesses reduce their emissions. This is a crisis that must be addressed now, otherwise we won't have much of a future. Things we could do locally include increasing the canopy of our streets, plant more trees, make this city more livable. I support a Green New Deal for Massachusetts. We should leverage our robust scientific and research communities to improve on technologies that I was part of when I founded my first company, demand response solutions. Electrifying our vehicle fleet should certainly be a priority. There's a lot in our building codes that could be improved upon to make our buildings much more efficient, especially as we're building up. We can do a lot more, and we must do a lot more to ensure that that we can preserve our future for our kids, or for us and our kids. So I think that there's a lot we can do, especially when it comes to building solar panels. The infrastructure of our city in general can be more efficient. This is a very old town, and there's a lot we can do to improve. We just need to find funding to make these improvements, and the political will to go ahead and pull the trigger on that. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Erica, same question to you.
Yeah, I think this question dovetails very nicely from the last one around progressive revenue, because at the state level, the big lever of power we have is to raise revenue and then spend that money to building a green economy. And I think that falls into largely three main buckets: the transportation, housing, and as well as renewable energy infrastructure. On the transportation front, biggest carbon emitter is transportation. So we need to be both investing in the MBTA and a public transportation system, including RTAs, so that people are not using single person vehicles to get around. That's one that's first and foremost, as well as, of course, investing in electric vehicles, investing in ensuring that people are able to get electric vehicles and charge them, and being able to get around through a safe bike infrastructure. Although that's largely a municipal issue, we are working on expanding bike infrastructure for state lands, which is something that I'm very passionate about. So that's the transportation piece. On the housing and buildings piece, every building should be net zero carbon, right? The stretch code should just be the code. There doesn't need to be a stretch code if we're actually serious about ensuring that all of our new developments are net zero carbon. And again, this is something that we have the technology for. We know how to do it. It's a matter of political will. It's a matter of spending money and resources. And we're talking, when we say Green New Deal at the state level, we're talking billions of dollars that needs to go into investing in updating our infrastructure and buildings so that it's up to net zero carbon. And then lastly is around renewable energy infrastructure. We've taken some steps on that in the past session with the 2 laws that we passed. But that's something that we have a lot more work to do around different forms of renewable energy and updating the grid that we can be doing, and particularly helping with, with individual level as well. But that's something that, again, critical to ensuring that these are union jobs that we are addressing this with a racial equity lens, that we're taking into account environmental justice communities that have taken the brunt of the climate crisis and continue to and will continue to, which we see in East Somerville is just one example, but across the state. So those are all examples of what we need to be doing when we say Green New Deal for Massachusetts. That is the investment we need to make.
Thank you. And Erica, next question goes first to you. What do you see as the barriers to passing the types of policies you've been talking about tonight and during your campaign? And how would you overcome those barriers?
In terms of barriers, there are many. I would say a big barrier that's really easy to understand is the influence of corporations, right? So for example, we did not get the stretch code into the bill and the 2050 roadmap bill because of the real estate lobby. That's something that looms in and as well as, with Eversource and other energy companies, they are pushing for certain policies and they get those policies at the state level and federal level. So that's a massive barrier that really can be overcome by people, right? And then that brings me to the second barrier, which is around the hierarchical nature of the state house. It is by design hierarchical. That is how legislatures are made. But the fact that there is not enough transparency and accountability is a symptom of that. That's why I fought for I fight for the two main foundational issues, which is rules as well as transparency, accountability, and accessibility, as well as raising progressive revenue. And that raising progressive revenue goes against corporate lobbyists and lobbyists that have the interests of the wealthy and corporations. So those are two incredibly foundational reasons why we don't have the change we want to see. I don't believe when people say, we have, only Somerville is blue. These are issues that are shared by Massachusetts voters through polling. It is very clear that this is not something that is politically difficult. But I do think that another barrier is around elections and voting systems where you see an outsized impact of certain voters and not others. So those are all some of the barriers. And that's why I come back to the fact that the power lies with the people. And I mean that when we say that we're building this statewide infrastructure to push on the state house, it needs to be statewide, because that's the other piece that is the other lever of power that we are faced with as state representatives. We have the power in the House, the power of the speaker and his interests, as well as the power of our people. And I serve you all, not the speaker. I work for you all. And so we need to ensure that we're building up that infrastructure statewide to remind every single state rep who they work for. And that's the other lever of power that we need to be building up. And that's the work that I've been doing in terms of supporting advocacy, supporting building out these organizing infrastructures across the state.
Thank you. Jason, over to you.
Thank you. I agree with Erica largely on this. Corporate interests are far too evident and prominent at the State House, actually at all levels of government. And we need to do our best to rein that in, to curtail their interests. We are more important than they are. And the government should not forget that it's for the people. And I think that transparency is also a major issue too. And that's why I've signed the Act on Mass Pledge to increase transparency within the State House. There's more to be done, and we should absolutely work to decrease these barriers to allow for a much more progressive agenda. That said, I think it's incredibly important that we work with our colleagues at the State House to get these things done. Somerville, Cambridge, we're very progressive, but people in my hometown of Hanover and Halifax, perhaps, and Plimpton, they're not as progressive as we are. So it does come down to being able to work with them and to the other representatives and my colleagues, potential colleagues, as well as leadership, to get things done while still remaining true to our core principles of transparency and making sure that everyone's voice is heard. So I think there's a lot to do. It's certainly not going to be an easy fight, but I'm up to the challenge, and I'd love to increase our ability to have more voices heard at the State House.
Thank you. So Jason, the next question goes to you first. Here in Massachusetts, the House of Representatives is known for having a very powerful speaker and leadership system. How do you envision operating effectively within this structure?
Yeah, no, good question. I have to rely on my own background in dealing with people that I disagree with and dealing with more powerful people than me to get things done. And being able to work within the system, I think, is incredibly critical, while also trying to make as many changes as possible without that being to the detriment of progress. So I envision it being very collaborative. I like working with people I disagree with because it allows for a spirited debate. And again, as I said, compromise can be seen as a four-letter word. People often do not like to compromise, but I'm not suggesting I compromise or would compromise on my core values or the core values of our district. But we need to be able to work with those that we disagree with in order to get things done. And so I would hope to bring my lived experience operating as a gay person of color to get things done in the private sector as an entrepreneur to the State House. And it's certainly not going to be an easy battle. And I'm sure I'll make my fair share of enemies as well, but it is something that I hope to succeed at in changing the hearts and minds of other representatives and working at every level of our government to get things done. And ultimately, that's the name of the game, is to work for the best possible outcome that's going to benefit the citizens, the residents of our district. So that's it's certainly a tall challenge, and I've been through a lot as an entrepreneur, and I hope to be able to apply what I've learned as an entrepreneur to what I hope to accomplish at the State House.
Thank you. Erica.
I think working within a very top-down structure that is the House requires sort of two pieces that I've followed and has served me well. First is to be hard on ideas and soft on people. That's how I've always operated, is that I'm very strong with my convictions. I bring the data, I bring the research. I've shared that with many of you all in the SDCC meetings where I share the slides. That is actually a pretty clear glimpse of how I operate in the State House as well in terms of persuading my colleagues. And then the other side is around being strategic. What is the strategy plan here? Is this something that we can use and leverage public pressure? Are there partners outside the State House? What is the power map, right? How can we pull levers of power? As I said earlier, these are not knowledge problems, these are power problems. There is a lack of power and political will to get these done. It's not that we don't know how to fix the T or know how to fix healthcare or any of the issues that are before us. So the issue with being strategic is trying to choose which way do we move forward, right, based on the issue. I felt that with Election Day registration, the calling was incredibly clear. We were on the phone with the, with the ED of Common Cause, and she was like, "I want a fight." And we said, "All right, we're going to get you a fight, because this is something that needs to be well known, that we are the singular institution in the way of getting rid of these Jim Crow era voting laws. And this is going to be how we wake up the public around why this needs to change and why Massachusetts is not living up to its progressive values." I'll provide another example, which is the estate tax, something that I fought really hard to change just 2 weeks ago. We did not succeed, but it was something that I really tried to make the estate tax as fulfilling all of the needs that the speaker and leadership team expressed, while also cutting down the cost in terms of the revenues, which my proposal decreased the revenue costs on the state by 60%. That's something that even the speaker said, "I agree with all of this," right? We've had a lot of agreement, a lot of alignment in the House, but unfortunately, because we vote so quickly, it just wasn't enough time and they wanted to ram the bill through. But that's another example of a different strategic choice.
Thank you. And now our final question. Starting with Erica, what is one of your favorite places to visit in Somerville?
My favorite place, oh my goodness. It's funny. My favorite places have, of course, I always love like outdoor spaces. I'm an avid gardener. So for anyone who hasn't come by, please come by to my oasis. But I also love visiting community gardens and the community path. But I wanted to add that because I do these office hours or coffee chats 2 times a month, sometimes every week, although we've kind of played around with the different timing and how we can increase turnout to those events. I have a lot of fondness to all of our public community spaces that we've held these office hours at, whether that be Lincoln Park, Lexington Park, Seven Hills, all these beautiful spaces. We are the densest city in New England, possibly one of the highest in the country. But we do have some really incredible green spaces and outdoor spaces that are COVID friendly that I just really love to visit. If I had to pick one it would probably be Lincoln Park. I've rented in multiple apartments in that area. So that Lincoln Park Argenziano School area is always near and dear to my heart. And I live in Union Square now. So of course it's somewhere I like to go to relax. And it's just such a great example of how really thoughtful urban planning and policy can really change the lives of our constituents and the lives of our residents. So if I had to pick one, that would be that, but certainly all of the open green spaces. And of course, please come by. I have tomatoes and I have too many, so please come over and have some.
Thank you. And Jason.
Thank you. I moved here just before the pandemic. I live in next to the Armory near Davis Square, and I was just getting out to enjoy the city and find my favorite restaurant and whatnot. Then everything shut down, and so that was a bit jarring. And over the past couple of years, though, I've come to love the entire city. In particular, a little bit favorite area would maybe be Davis, only because I live near Davis, but I've grown to love Union Square. And I must say, if I had to choose one area in the entire city, I am a history buff, and this city is filled with history. Powder House, everything, the Powder House, the Prospect Tower. You're going to find me there if I have any free time. And also a weird hobby that I've found myself doing is trying to find any little horse tie downs around the city that still remain from, the 19th century and the 20th century, of course, too. But the city's filled with history, and I'm always trying to keep an eye out for what Somerville used to look like and see the progress that we've made. Just looking around Union Square and seeing these skyscrapers going up is interesting. It certainly shows the difference between what that square looked like, 150 years ago versus what it looks like today. And so any historic area of the city is where I'm going to find and be most at home at. But yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you. And that completes our questions for this forum. So in wrapping up, we now invite each candidate to share a closing statement for 2 minutes, starting with Jason.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that microphone. Minor crisis. Right. Thank you. Thank you for the questions and having for both of us here tonight. My priority is to deliver results for Somerville. Our constituents can't afford to have tangible results deferred in the name of ideological purity. Fighting for ideological purity is an empty fight if it means we alienate everyone who even slightly disagrees and fail to create any change. I am committed to progressive values and want to work to create meaningful change through cooperation and coalition building. I have the lived experience to bring disparate groups together to raise up progressive startups and women and BIPOC founders and work to raise up our most underserved neighborhoods. I want to keep Somerville an inclusive city and home to diverse working families and students. It's not just theoretical to me, it's personal. We need to stop the tide of displacement that is currently happening. If elected, I don't see my role as an activist, but instead the conduit for activism to be translated into reality. I hope you will consider electing me so that Somerville can be represented by someone who is personally invested in improving Somerville and knows what's at stake. Please feel free to contact me by email. My contact info is at jasonmackey.org, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts. With that, I humbly ask for your vote in this primary on September 6th.
Thank you so much. Erica.
Thank you. Democrats, it goes without saying that we live in unprecedented times. And this is a moment of reckoning for our country, our Commonwealth, and for all of us. Our human rights are under attack and our democracy is crumbling. This is why I've worked tirelessly to tackle foundational issues, including transparency, accountability, and accessibility in state government, as well as fighting to raise progressive revenue and stop tax breaks for the very wealthy so that all of our public goods are well funded so that we can thrive as a society rather than merely survive day by day, month by month, paycheck to paycheck. And rooted in saving our democracy is something we need to reckon with. That democracy is not a machine that is built to some specification or blueprint or clearly defined set of rules. Rather, it's an organism. It is a living being, and like living beings, it is fragile, it is complex, and it has an animating spirit. It requires the human spirit and agency to order to survive and thrive. And American democracy has always been a relentless struggle, both to expand its promise and to protect itself from decay and corruption. This has been core to my work as your state representative, to work hand in hand with you all, with my colleagues, with city officials, to fight for a world that we all deserve. And I want to just leave you all with a quick story about, I hold these office hours, and a voter came to me in Lexington Park asking, this all seems really dire. How are we going to get through this? And I just want to leave you all with something that I shared with him, which was Maimonides, a 12th century Jewish philosopher, said, hope is a belief in the plausibility of the possible rather than the necessity of the probable. And in many points in our history, it was improbable that someone who looked like me could serve in public office. It was improbable that we could have the rights of abortion access, of gender equality, of LGBTQ equality. Those were all things that were improbable until it happened. And I believe that is the case with all of the issues before us and that we discussed tonight. It is not improbable. That does not mean we do not have hope, and that does not mean we do not fight tirelessly. And I'm committed to fighting tirelessly on behalf of Somerville and in partnership with you all. Thank you.
And huge thank you to both of our candidates, Jason Mackey and Representative Erica Uderhoven, for joining us to share your experiences, your positions, your platforms. The recording of this forum will be shared on our Somerville Dems Facebook page. So everyone here, please share and forward this information with your friends. And we appreciate everyone joining us for the forum tonight.